Hi guys, welcome back or welcome to Switch to Life. And in today's video, we are going to be reviewing the first TV show based off of the Croods franchise. That, of course, being Dawn of the Croods, which is treated like a prequel to the original movie. And I gotta say, I really love this series, despite the fact that it's not really canon. Yeah, so the reason is mostly due to the fact that in the second movie, A New Age, Eep says, "I never had a girlfriend before," but throughout the series, we see that she has quite a few different friends who are girls. Also, I think just the change in animation, which, while I don't think that should be a reason it's not canon, definitely adds to the fact that it's not canon. So there's that. But speaking of, I will admit that I do enjoy the animation. It mostly relies on slapstick and body mutilation to get humor across, but I really do enjoy the animation. Granted, I will admit that the character movements can sometimes be a little bit stiff in the fact that they don't really move unless they're doing some very exaggerated movement, but other times the movement is actually pretty fluid, so I guess it just fluctuates depending on the scene. And while I will admit the characters don't really mesh that well with the environment in the background, I will admit that the background is actually really beautiful and the way it's painted, so there's that. Now, in terms of the voice acting, well, not really any of the voice actors from the original movie return, which is kind of disappointing, but at the same time, I'm pretty sure they found really good voices for all of the characters, not just the ones from the movie, but all of the new ones that this series introduces. The characters have very funny, distinguished voices, you can actually tell them apart, and not to mention the fact that the line deliveries are just so funny, which in my opinion makes this series better than the other TV show, The Croods Family Tree, because in that show, the line deliveries just aren't really hitting that well. And then in this series, they do an amazing job of being funny. But then there's also the fact that there's so many different characters in the Dawn of the Croods TV show, when compared to Family Tree, there's literally only 10 characters in the entire show. Now, as for the story, I will admit that it's pretty simplistic when it comes to the runtime, mostly because the episode lengths are usually 11 minutes, though there are a lot of episodes that reach that 22-minute mark. But essentially, the series is just about the Croods going on super fun adventures on their day-to-day life as they try to avoid the struggles of, the early days of caveman, like trying to avoid predators, trying to survive the deadly and hostile environment, and of course, trying to survive their interactions with their caveman-like neighbors. Which I will admit that it is kind of sad that this series doesn't have any of the neighbors that was in the original movie.
There used to be neighbors. The Gorts, smashed by a mammoth. The Earths, mosquito bite. Frogs, common cold. The Horks, swallowed by a sand snake.
Instead, we get completely brand new, unique characters that really just add to the show, and they feel like their own personalities, which I really enjoyed. There's Snoot, who is an annoying neighbor who's very much full of himself, which goes great with Grug, as the two of them like to battle about their ego. And the reason that Snoot, despite being so scrawny and weak, still considers his brain superior to everyone is just because he's the son of the founder of their valley.
And we lived in Valley, a neighborhood named after the last words of its founder, who forgot to check if anyone was already living there.
He's married to this diva named Meep, who loves to sing, and, well, I will admit that she is a good singer, but everybody else finds her annoying because she mostly attracts predators with it. And then they have two sons, Bulk and Sulk. Bulk is this shouty kid who literally just can't turn down his volume for the life of him. And then there's Sulk, who is basically this emo kid who likes to be sarcastic and say he hates everything, and he pretty much judges what is cool and what is uncool. Same thing goes for Pat, who is this really popular girl, mostly because she's actually the daughter of the head hunter, Amber.
Pat's the girl who invented the eye roll.
They actually all go to school together where it's taught by teacher Squawk, who, like the caveman times, is mean and harsh to the students that he teaches, mostly because he's trying to teach them about the environment that they're supposed to live in. And he constantly puts them in danger and he sends them into deep trouble.
All I did was talk in class.
And essentially just is super mean to all of his students, at the same time building up their character. He's also probably the most evil character in Valley because he doesn't listen to the little voice inside his head that tells him not to do bad things. For Eep and Thunk, the only upside to their school life is the fact that it introduced them to their best friends. For Thunk, that is Womp, a really round kid who is pretty much helpless and has no survival instincts whatsoever, and unfortunately, he gets constantly eaten and yet for some reason always survives. Then there's Eep's best friend Lurk, who it was actually homeschooled until one day she decided to leave the cave, and we never meet her family because her family is way too scared to leave the cave themselves. But essentially, she just becomes the stalker to Eep. I'm pretty sure she's actually the world's very first stalker, but she just constantly wants to hang out with the awesome best friend that is Eep. And her dream in life is to somehow, some way become Eep's sister, which is a very admirable goal, but again, stalker tendencies. Yet, because she just lived her whole life sheltered and nobody really knows how friendship works, they just roll with it, and it's their whole friendship dynamic, and Eep is actually really happy to hang out with Lurk. Though not as happy as she is to hang out with our last kid, Kevin, who is a bit scrawny and weak, but at the same time, he is extremely hot and essentially the cause of the world's first crush. At the same time, he's also a selfish jerk who is obsessed with himself, and while Eep does like how good Kevin looks, throughout the series, she tries to go after Kevin, only to realize he's a jerk, then goes after him again, he's a jerk. I don't really know. I'm just happy that she finally found a good-looking guy in Guy, I guess. Oh, and speaking of, Guy and Belt do actually make an appearance in 3 of the episodes. There's the season 1 finale where Belt just goes dun, dun, dun. Then in a later episode, Guy and Eep do actually get into a relationship with each other, but they don't know that it's each other. Essentially, they're just randomly using pig rats to pictogram, and it's basically like text messaging a stranger you met online, but before technology, so there's that. But of course, my favorite appearance was in the final episode of the series, where it's revealed that the whole Dawn of the Croods series was more or less just being told to Guy as a series of stories, which I really do enjoy, but at the same time, with Lurk's appearance in the finale, it also indicates that most of these stories actually did happen, which again, like I said, means that it can't be canon to the actual movies. So the TV show, not canon to the movies, but still really good and definitely worth watching. This series also introduces the concept of firsts. Essentially, like just every episode is introducing first, like the first Vegetarian, like vegetarian. Thunk creates the very first TV show by using shadow puppets, which was pretty cool. Grug ends up creating the concept of the coin flip, heads or tails, and a bunch of other shenanigans that lead to super fun adventures that last for the day. And one invention that Grug did was inventing the spear, which was really helpful because before they were just chucking heavy rocks at predators, where they would just leave humans out as bait, which was actually the main job for a man named Batesy, though that was pretty much his whole personality. Then the bonkers would throw rocks at the prey as they were digesting the bait, at which point they would either rescue the bait or the bait would have already been dead. Who knows? Thunk actually was the one who created the concept of retirement because he tried out to be bait and decided to not do it anymore. But some of the bonkers that are part of the hunting party includes the lead hunter, Amber, who wears an eye patch and well, she doesn't really speak that good English, but I just find her personality to be very funny because of that. But at the same time, she's also extremely fierce, and she will kill if you insult her. Then, of course, there's Grug's best friend, Monk, who is a bit like Thunk, except extremely dumb, to the point where he's playing a game of hide and seek with his family, and he's been looking for them for the past 7 years. And you might be thinking maybe his family just abandoned him, but nope. Later episodes prove that the family has been hiding this entire time, waiting for Monk to find them. Really goes to show how dumb Monk's family actually is. There's also another character named Old Man Root, who I admit I just really love, because even though he's a bit of a pacifist and a tree hugger, he ends up creating a lot of dangerous things that eventually come into the hands of the Croods and unleash chaos on the valley. Also, he has a very interesting story that leads to the world's very first holiday. You know, holiday. Now, that's pretty much it for all of our major characters, but there are plenty, and I mean plenty, of reoccurring characters that you have to care about, but for the most part, they don't really even affect the plot of the episodes that they're in, so we're just gonna leave it at that. So, without further ado, let's dive into the story, which I will admit is really good. Granted, like I said, it's mostly just about the cavemen going about their day-to-day lives, but there is a little bit of an overarching story. So in the first episode, Gran is in the jaws of a bear owl, and the Croods force her to move in with them so that she can actually stay alive. So while Gran is weak when it comes to the predators, when it comes to humans, she is very much as fierce as ever. Nobody wants to stand up to her because she will mostly annoy and pester them. And at the same time, she does have some killer instincts, so there's that. I really do enjoy Gran in this series, especially the way that she treats Grug. Like in the movie, she basically bullies and harasses Grug, but at the same time, she also has a deep respect for him because of his strength. That is literally the only thing that she likes about him, though. Well, that and his love for her daughter, Uga, which is a lot more than I can say for her love of Uga, which is kind of non-existent at most of the points in the show. But after that first episode, Gran lives with the Croods, and they just go on a bunch of fun adventures. And what I do love is that while there is a bit of continuity, it's mostly just relegated to the season endings where there's cliffhangers leading to the next season. For instance, in the season 1 finale, the moon eats the sun and Grug falls off of a cliff. Well, season 2 starts by Grug getting rescued off the cliff, and the moon eating the sun was just revealed to be a solar eclipse. So everything went back to normal. Then, of course, in the season 2 finale is where the story gets really interesting, and it starts with Grug being upset by all of the community rules of Valley. So basically, whenever he catches prey, he has to share it with the whole community, which makes it so that he caught a large animal, but he only gets a very small piece for him and his entire family. That's just one of the rules, but you get the gist. So essentially, he's fed up with the community and decides that he needs a break, and so he takes his family and they shun the valley. You know, like vacate and shun it. As they journey in the wilderness, they encounter the Broods, who are these weird monkey-like people who are basically covered with fur and they have tails, but for the most part, they're just like ordinary humans. There's Trixie, who's responsible for all of the schemes that they come up with, followed by her husband Dub, who is actually mute and constantly needs Trixie to translate for him, which is kind of funny because if you know what Dub means, then it's just really funny. Then there's their daughters, Frump, who is actually extremely dumb, like a lot dumber than Thunk, if that's possible. But of course, there's also Blurg, who is actually a bit of a savage wild girl, which we will talk about later. And then there's also Dub's mom, who is named Mima.
Anyone need a hug? Oh, you call that banana, Grandma? You disgust me.
So essentially, all of the Croods have their own rival in the Broods family. Well, except for Sandy, who is a baby. But I guess she does have a lot of animal tendencies. So I guess you could say her rival is the monk Wawas that the Broods control. One of whom actually does abandon their tribe and goes to live with the Croods as a pet. Though they don't call it a pet because that word hasn't been invented yet. They actually name him Not Food so that everybody will know that he's not food, because at this point they're pretty much hunting every single animal that they come in contact with. Which, speaking of, I will admit another great thing about this series is the animal variety that we have here. Sure, the original movie came up with the concept of combining two species together to create a very fun and unique animal species, and well, this series just took it to a whole new level, not only introducing over a dozen new species, but also establishing the names of many of the different animals that were in the original movie, which honestly, I could go into more on this, but it deserves its own video. If you want me to make a video discussing all of the animal hybrids in the Croods franchise, make sure to leave that down below in the description. Well, that was a very long tangent. Let's go back into the story. And at first it seems like the Broods are actually really nice, but it turns out they're actually scavengers who take over valleys and then use up all of their resources, and they decide that Valley is going to be the perfect place to invade next. So the Croods try to make their way back, but unfortunately get eaten by a Tyrannaconda, which leads into season 3 where they manage to escape the Tyrannaconda, but unfortunately by that point the Broods have already invaded Valley, and so they have to find a way to fight back against the Broods. And in the process they end up abandoning the Valleyites in the arms of a molar bear because they're trapped in a cave with nowhere to go. So even though the Croods manage to save Valley from the Broods, when they rescue the Valleyites are mad at the Croods and decide to shun them, basically exile them and pretend they don't exist. Eventually, the Broods do end up trying to attack again, and this time, Grug decides that he needs the help of the Valleyites in order to save the valley. So they all work together, reforming the community, and then for some strange reason, they decide that Grug should become the new leader of Valley, even though he's the one who brought the Broods in the first place. So essentially, Grug is in charge of fighting against the Broods, even though it's all his fault. So essentially, Grug becomes the very first tribal leader, which is very weird. But anyway, I will admit that he is a truly, truly good leader. He wants to be truly great, but unfortunately, he does make a few mistakes, which, when you're the first ever leader of the entire world, yeah, that's to be expected. During his time as leader, he creates a bunch of good concepts like weekends, how you work 5 days of the week, but then you take the weekend off for 2 days. He also invents the concept of meet things, where essentially it's just meetings where they can talk about the problems and he comes up with solutions and at the same time listens to other people for solutions. Now, despite the fact that the Broods were built up as this big threat that was going to constantly come back after the season 3 premiere, they rarely made an appearance in later episodes. In fact, I think they've only appeared in about 5 out of the 52 episodes in total, which is definitely a problem. But at the same time, as Grug is also trying to protect them from the Broods, as they're constantly mentioned, he ends up creating new problems. So basically, the Croods are the leading cause of a lot of the problems in the valley. So how did they manage to beat the Broods? Well, it all started when the Broods kidnapped Eep and Thunk for ransom, and in the process, Thunk fell in love with one of the Brood kids named Blurg, and well, he tried to get her to fall in love with him, and in a way, he succeeded. Sure, she tries to play it off as cool, but unfortunately, she fell head over heels for him as well. Then Thunk invited Blurg to a school dance, and well, after that, they actually fell in love and became an official couple. even though it was a forbidden romance. Then in a later episode, the rest of the Croods are actually mad about the fact that Thunk is dating a Brood, but the Broods are also mad that their daughter is dating a Crood. And in the process, the two families have to work together to try to tear the two apart. And in the end, it just brings the two families together. So, peace is restored, right? Well, no. In the final episode, the Croods tried to reintegrate the Broods into society, but in the process, it just doesn't really go that well with the Valleyites. But luckily, after arguing about how much the Valleyites and the Broods both hate Grug, they end up bonding over it, and so the Broods are reformed members of society. So, I really enjoyed the Broods concept, mostly because it gave Thunk a girlfriend, which I think he desperately needs because, well, in the movies, he's kind of this one-note character. So giving him a girlfriend in this series was really good. And I'm honestly sad that she did not return in any future installments, and I don't think we ever will see her in future installments. Because, like I keep saying, this series isn't canon. Now, that's just one of the series finales, because in the second series finale, all of the teenagers are officially done with school. So they have a graduation ceremony where they are glad that they fed Teacher Squawk before he shuns them forever, and he welcomes the next generation of students, which are basically babies like Sandy and another kid named Cliff. But of course, I'm sure you're wondering what happened to all of the neighbors in Valley and why aren't they in the first movie? Well, the actual series finale dives into that. Essentially, there's a meteorite that's going to crash land into Earth, and if they don't find a way to destroy the meteorite, they are going to die. And, well, being cavemen, they don't really have a good way to fight the meteorite. And in the end, the Croods decide to sacrifice their home. They take the roof of their cave, and as a community, the entire valley carries that roof to a volcano, at which point the volcano shoots the rock up like a missile into the meteor, causing the meteor to be destroyed and saving the valley, but leaving the Croods without a home. Now, throughout the episode, Monk is actually obsessed with spending the end of the world with his family, and he ends up inspiring Grug to retire from being a leader so that he can spend more time to be with his family. And now that they don't even have a home anymore, it's just perfect. So Grug steps down as the leader of Valley and names Monk the new leader. Unfortunately, Monk is a very bad leader and pretty much destroys the valley in 4 days. So all of the citizens of Valley moved around to find new valleys and new caves to live in. This also applies to the Croods, who, like I said, destroyed their cave so that they could save the world from the meteor. And sadly, without the Valley community, the cave life just wasn't the same, and we get what we get in the first Croods movie. Now that they no longer live in a community and the Croods are on their own, that's why we see that they're struggling at the start of the first movie, where in this series they're able to have a bit of fun. Well, that and the fact that the series just isn't canon to the actual movies. And that is my review of Dawn of the Croods. Essentially a really simple series that surprisingly has very good writing with lots of humor, great voice acting despite the fact it doesn't have any of the movie actors, some pretty creative music considering they have to make it sound like it's made by cave people, which is actually really good. But my personal favorite is that unlike the Croods family tree, there's actually a cohesive story, which, while I'm sad that it's not canon because, you know, Thunk doesn't have a girlfriend now, I'm actually very happy that we got the story. But my personal favorite part of this series is the concept of first, how they just go around randomly inventing things, coming up with new words for them that sound like gibberish, but are actually common day words for us. So with all that out of the way, what do you guys think of this TV show? Make sure to leave your thoughts down below in the comment section, and also, who is your favorite member of the Crood family? And if you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to support my channel by going to my membership program, or you can just do the free option and subscribe. And if you guys do subscribe, make sure that you keep an eye out for when I review the actual Croods movies, as well as the other TV show, The Croods Family Tree. But above all else, make sure that you guys are staying safe out there, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye-bye.
Ooh, wait, look, there's one more story here.
Those things will haunt me forever!